Hitman 2-3, this is Hitman 2. What's the status? Over. 2-3, stand by. Goliath, this is 2 Bravo. Request permission to engage enemy paratroopers and attempt to snatch a grid Papa Uniform 259er, 119er. Break. Enemy is unaware of our presence at this time. Over. Solid copy. Hitman 2-3, Echo 5 Foxtrot. This is Hitman 2 actual.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Ben Powers coming at you from the Commander's Voice. My guest today is the great friend of the show, George Luz Jr. George, it is fantastic to have you back.
Hey, thanks so much, Ben. It's a pleasure.
No, this is great. So, like, live from the basement in Haguenau, as we always like to joke. But this is really exciting. In all seriousness, George is in Rhode Island, but that's all right too. What we want to talk about today, George, and we've touched on this in previous episodes, but you had mentioned in a phone call we were having that you have so many artifacts from your dad's life after the Army where he stayed in touch with Band of Brothers. And what we really wanted to talk about today was the legacy of the Band of Brothers and the lifelong friendships that the men had formed. So if you kind of want to set us up, and then we can start going through some of your artifacts.
Well, you know, that's the amazing thing. I think every basement or every attic has got this stuff for anybody whose father or grandfather served, or grandmother or mother served during World War II or any war. They all have these things. And so I'm kind of blessed, I guess, in a sense, because, you know, my dad was depicted in a miniseries. And so, but, you know, so we have these things, and I'm constantly kind of looking at them and things like that. And so this is a little bit about the relationship between Dick Winters and my dad. And it says, "Dear George, for a guy who was never a loss for words, you always have some kind of a wisecrack to make, and you're full of pep at all times. To which the score, are we going to see you at the reunion in August? I'm looking forward to hearing all about your bad behavior for the last 35 years. I know all about the part that happened before that. Hang tough, Dick Winters." And
no, please go ahead.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Winters was, and some of the officers didn't come to the reunions as regularly as the enlisted guys. I think it was just kind of a, you know, the officers felt as though that was something the enlisted guys should do, and we'll just kind of step back. Is that what you find?
No, certainly. You always want to have that distinction, not because, you know, officers are better than enlisted people, but you don't want to intrude on the private moments the men have together, and you never want to be seen as one of the boys, because you need to be able to preserve that authority. Again, not because you're special or better, but because it's just mentally easier to give orders and make tough decisions when you're not invested in what you would call a friendship. I mean, you definitely care, and you have the well-being of your men top of mind at all times, which is manifested by the fact he's still in touch. Winters is still in touch with your dad 35 years later, but there was never a true social equality, if you will. There's always a line.
Yeah, no, I agree. I certainly can understand that. You know, I've never served in the military, and you have, so you have a better understanding of that. But yeah, so that's kind of what I observed when it comes to that. So it was interesting, though, that Winters did have a file on all of the guys. Not a file in a bad way, but he had a file in a good way. And you know, when I went to his home in Hershey after my dad had passed away, I show up at the door with my buddy John and Ethel opens the door, and she looks upstairs, and there's Dick standing at the top of the step. And she says, "I guess you've been invited to the inner sanctum." So anyway, so we went upstairs and, you know, went into his office and sat there, and he pulled out the file on my dad. And it was just other pictures that I hadn't seen, and just some of the correspondence that went back and forth. So it was really neat to see that part of it, you know, to see the side of Winters that, you know, these men meant so much to him.
No, that's absolutely amazing. Now, one thing I think is cool, and you'd mentioned this, and we're getting ready to talk about it, despite the fact that there was that distinction between the officers and the enlisted when it came to the reunions, that you have a copy of a photo that came from that meeting at Major Winters' house, where he actually did attend a reunion.
Well, yeah, it was kind of funny. We were out to dinner. We went to Bob Evans. I said before, when I called him up and said, I'm going to be in for a conference, can I take you and Ethel out to dinner? And he said, yeah, sure. So we went to Bob Evans. I've never been to Bob Evans before, and I've been once. I haven't been since. It was very good, but I was expecting taking him out to more of a fancy place, but he was happy with Bob Evans. So we went there. So I asked him the question. I said, hey, Dick, when was the last time we were at the same reunion? And without missing a beat, he pulls his picture out and bam, it's a picture of BB Gordon and I at the 1981 reunion. Now, BB Gordon, that's Walter Gordon's daughter. So try not to be distracted by the picture of me and BB because we're like both young. I think I was 22 or 23. My hair was long. I was living in Southern California. Actually, at that time, I was living in Denver. But
This is a very 80s photo.
yeah, I had my members only jacket on. I think I was the last remaining member. So, but if you look over our left shoulder, you'll see Dick and then you'll see Talbert. And that
That's
was the
amazing.
first reunion that Talbert had been to. And that was in 1981 in San Diego.
That's amazing. I remember reading Ambrose's book about how Talbert was one of the guys who fell off the face of the earth for a while. So what's the story about how they get him to the reunion?
Well, they kind of looked around. They were poking and prodding and trying to find out because they knew he was in California someplace, and I guess they were fortunate enough to find out where he was, and they got him to come to the reunion, and they bought him a suit and some clothes and stuff. And I think this is back in the day when they didn't have a tailor on staff at the clothing store, and I think my mother said they stapled his pants to make sure that the hem was right. Now, my mom used to be a seamstress, so I guess a stapler was the best thing that they had at that time. But so they stapled this man, and it was great to have Talbert there, and it was kind of ironic that I didn't really know it was Talbert. I knew it was Winters, but I didn't know it was Talbert, and it wasn't until we were at a reunion. I think it might have been in Phoenix after the premiere where Talbert's brother, Max, was at the reunion. And I brought a bunch of the pictures, and that was one of the pictures that I had brought. And he came up to me and said, hey, somebody said my brother's in one of the pictures. So I said, oh, well, let's take a look. So we're just kind of flipping through them. And it is the one, BB and I. And then he said, yeah, it is my brother right in the back. So it's like, wow, man, how cool is that?
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah,
It,
that was
it's
pretty neat.
it's interesting to me to think how so many of us only know the men of the company through the book and especially through the miniseries. So, you have an image in your brain that, Talbert's, larger than life. He's one of the big characters. But in reality, you're like, there were so many different men in the company. And as you grew up interacting with these folks, you didn't really know their backstories from the war. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like a different picture emerges once the miniseries comes out versus what you actually lived going to these reunions.
Oh, sure, because these were just my dad's buddies. And as far as I was concerned, everybody had guys like this in their family. Everybody's mom or dad served in the war. Not as many moms, but everybody's, had a mom or a dad that served in World War II or an uncle or an aunt or whatever. And so I was just thinking that everybody had, friends like this and additional uncles and aunts
Sure.
of a thing. So it was really pretty neat to meet all these guys and just great characters all the way around. And it's how it is to serve with guys and gals, and how important those relationships are.
No, certainly. And one relationship that it doesn't come out so much in the miniseries, but your dad and Walter Gordon had a really strong relationship. So we've got this photo of you and Bebe Gordon, and Walter Gordon had like several daughters, didn't he?
Yeah, it was funny because he had four beautiful daughters and one son, Scotty. So there was BB, Linda, Gay, BB, Linda, Gay. Oh man, BB, Linda, Gay, and Tracy. I'm on Prevagen.
No worries. And then you've got, the Comptons have a daughter and Malark's got a daughter. So there's all these women at the reunion. So that must have been a pretty good ratio of men to women when you went to see these people every year.
Yeah, it was pretty funny at that particular reunion. Yeah, BB and Linda was there from the Gordons, and Tracy Compton and her sister Cindy were there, and Marianne Malaki was there too. She was the young one. She was like 16, and then we were all in our early 20s. So yeah, so it was kind of neat. And then actually, my mom and dad had brought my old girlfriend there too, Nina, who was wonderful and a dear friend of the family. So they brought Nina along as well.
No, that could have been an awkward situation to have your old girlfriend when you're a young man.
It could have been, but she's wonderful. So I was very fortunate there, and so she integrated very well into the whole family thing. She loved my mom and dad to this day.
That's awesome.
And, she was just a dear friend of the family. So
That's
but
absolutely
it was
fantastic.
kind of humorous. Was Walter Gordon at that particular event? He said, and he knew I did a lot of traveling. He said, George, I know you do a lot of traveling, and if you were ever in Louisiana, please come by my house. I've got 4 daughters. If you would just take one, I would be so happy. And but he was a super guy. He was funny as can be. I've got his interview with Ambrose, and I listened to it routinely just to hear his voice. And he had such a great relationship with all the men, but especially my dad. And there's this one little letter that he had sent my dad, and it's all about that particular reunion. And he just says in here about me and his kids. He said, why didn't your George propose to at least one of them when he had the chance? And then this is the great line right here. I sure would have liked to have been able to call you an in-law.
That is cool.
And that's the relationship that these guys had. Was they were just so tight. And
That's amazing. Now, so did any relationships actually occur between like kids of the company? Did anyone ever actually form a couple, or was that just you didn't see each other enough for any romance to blossom among any of the children of the men of the company?
Yeah, and no, I think the after, what you said there, we got together during the reunions and things like that. Early on, there wasn't a lot of kids at the reunion, and this one here in '81, I got a chance to see some of the other kids. And then I think a lot of it was localized as well. So if there was a reunion, let's say in Portland or something like that, you had a lot of the folks in that geographical area, whether it was, Tracy, the Comptons, the Baines, the Malarkeys, and things like that. You would have it more localized. And
That
it
makes sense.
wasn't until the series was coming out that a lot of the kids, we all got more involved. We all
Got
got
it.
more involved.
That makes a lot of
And,
sense. And the
but yeah, no
series,
romances to my knowledge anyway.
fair enough, fair enough. But the series coming out, that is actually a great transition point because Major Winners stays in touch with the families. And unfortunately, folks who followed the podcast should know that your father passed away, in 1998, prior to the series coming out. But Major Winners stayed in touch with your mom, and he sent her a Christmas card after your dad passing that kind of alluded to the series was going to happen. I think you have that in your collection as well.
Yeah, that was the amazing thing about Winters was he did stay really connected to my mom. He sent everything that he would have sent to my dad, he sent to my mom, you know. So this one came, I think this one was right before the miniseries. And he said, Del, I must confess, as I come to your name on the company E list, I whisper to myself that this is one of my very special friends. Pay special attention to all of the press releases from Tom Hanks this year, and you will be sure one day see Band of Brothers on the news, along with George. And then he went on to say, who do you want to play the role of George? Hang tough, Dick Winters.
That's
So,
fantastic. I love the fact that he, is still signing his correspondence hang tough. I mean, you hear Damian Lewis say that in the miniseries, and I think one of the books about Major Winners is called Hang Tough. But sometimes you wonder if that's part of the legend or an affectation. But you've got all this proof that's
yeah.
who he was.
Yeah. Yeah, he certainly did. He certainly carried that on. And then there was one that came out after that. It's a quick little backstory. So my dad dies in October 15th of 98. And what I did was I grabbed his roster and I sent Christmas cards out that year to all the guys that I knew and all the guys who were on that list. And it was a kind of funny story. One came from Dottie Stroll, Rod Stroll's wife. And so you could just imagine, okay, so my dad dies. Everybody's aware that my dad died. And then all of a sudden, here comes a Christmas card from George Luz. What in the world is this? He's dead, you know? So Dottie Stroll told me, she said to Rod, no, this is his son, George Luz, the Jr. So what I did was I picked up, you know, like I said, my dad died in October, and I got the Christmas cards out like he normally would. And I did it every year after that until all of the men are gone.
That's
And
amazing.
so I sent the last one out to Mr. Freeman last year.
Yes, sir.
But anyway, yeah. So this one came. This Christmas card came from Winters, and it was after the series. And what he says is, Del, I miss George. How he would have enjoyed this past year with all his company E friends. Now it's up to you and all of his friends and family to make sure he will never be forgotten. Hang tough, Dick Winters.
No, that is a powerful statement, and you guys have done a wonderful job ensuring that his legacy and the whole company has been carried forward.
We're very fortunate. You know, you look between Chris Langlois and the Malarkeys and the Garniers and the Comptons and the Bains and the Gordons, all the way around. A lot of the kids continue to make sure to tell the stories of their dad and the company, and all the other Americans that sacrifice. And you know, it doesn't matter if you were training people in the United States to fight over in Europe, or if you were in Europe peeling potatoes, or if you were kicking the doors in, whatever it was, everybody was pulling in the same direction. So
Roger that. Roger that.
They've all got letters just like this, and I'm just happy to share mine.
No, and I really am so thrilled that you're doing that. And you have a great one from Webster's wife, Barbara, from the same time period after the series came out, if I recall, that you might be able to share with us as well.
Yeah, well, hey, this picture is one of my favorites, and Barbara had sent it to us, and I had seen it a long time ago. It was in part of one of my dad's pictures of the reunions, and it's from the 1956 reunion. And I think we may have shown this before too.
We have, but it's definitely worth revisiting.
Yeah, it's a great shot. It's the 56 reunion, which was held in Los Angeles, and this is the picture from Webster's house. And so she's got the whole list of names there. And so there's C.T. Smith, John Sheedy, my dad, Tipper, Mrs. Sheedy, Webster, Smith, David Webster, and Chuck Grant is the last one as you go to the very top of that. And then there's a bunch of little kids smattered inside of it. So what she did was she had sent this out when everybody got back from the world premiere in Normandy, which was just the coolest thing. You know,
that is very cool.
Be able to go to that. So yeah, it's dated actually June 20th of 2000. June 20th of 2001. And it says, Dear Del, have you come down to earth yet? I haven't. Wasn't that the most fabulous trip ever? I so enjoyed meeting you again, and to think that our husbands were friends. Enclosed is a picture I had made for you and your son George. Keep well, take care, best wishes to you and your family. Barbara Webster Emery. And she was such a dear friend. You know, I got a chance to meet her, and she sent me quite a bit of the writings of Webster, because prior to Webster writing the book or the manuscript, he wrote a lot of vignettes, and then I think once he wrote all these different vignettes, then he compiled them into the book form. And we all know the book wasn't produced until, I don't know, 1990 something.
Yes, sir. I think it actually came out after Ambrose's book, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. So
No,
again,
no, you're right. You're right. And so she really was a delightful woman, and I remember when she passed away, because her husband Charles Embry sent me a nice card and thanked me for, I don't know, just being a friend, and said, I just wanted to let you know that Barbara passed away. And but
it's
those are
amazing
the
in
relationships.
in a time before like electronic communication where you could just send somebody a text or an email. The level of correspondence these people shared and just the connection they maintained is a very moving tribute to the bonds these men formed and the bonds the families formed after the war. I think it's fantastic. I want to go back to the photo real quick and the fact that Tipper's in the photo next to your dad, because fans of the series all know, Tipper's horrifically wounded in Carentan, and you had a little vignette about some folks are surprised that Tipper was still around, if I remember correctly. At what the
Yeah. Well, I was talking to Ed about this naturally before he passed away, and so he was in the Michigan area, and I think Talbert was from Indiana. So he went to pay a visit to Talbert's family, and he met Mrs. Talbert, and so she wrote a letter to Floyd, and then so you can imagine, like you said, is you write the letter, you put it in the mail, it takes you a couple of weeks to get there. I guess I'm not sure. So he gets the letter and is reading this letter and saying, "My mom just said she just met Ed Tipper," and it's like, Ed Tipper, he's dead, And so he writes a letter back to her saying, you got to be kidding me. He was all busted up. He looked like he was dead. And then she writes a letter back to him, says, no, he's very much alive. And he was such a great guy. I got a chance to know Ed really well. I was very, very blessed. He was a really smart guy, but he really was able to connect with smart people and then people like me. Challenge. So, but he was just such a wonderful guy. He It was very active for a guy who got busted up, pretty good. He was
Yes,
very
sir.
active. He downhill skied up until his mid 80s.
Wow.
And I remember kind of a funny a funny line he told me. He bought a Honda. I think he was just about 89 or 90. And he said the young salesman said, "Do you want the extended warranty?" And he said, "Do I look like I need the extended?" Because he was like 90.
I
And
love that paratrooper humor. That's awesome.
yeah, so he was such a great guy, And I think we all have this. I've got phone messages on my phone from some of these guys, and with my system, you can only have 20. You can only have 20 messages. I don't know what yours is, but mine says you can only have 20, and after that, your mailbox is full. So I've got like 13 messages from the guys, and I don't know how to download them or put them someplace. But it's just great to hear their voice.
That's all. You need to get with your tech guy and make sure you create some files for those.
Yeah, I'd like to know if there's a way to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the people watching can say, "Oh yeah, it's easy. You just do this here and that." It's like, "Oh, is that as simple as it is?"
Anybody who knows, please leave a comment for George below, and we would greatly appreciate that. And the historiography of the Band of Brothers would also greatly appreciate that.
although you're gonna have to explain to me how to make it work, because I can't make comments on my own YouTube page. It says you can't make comments, so it's like.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about, because we've talked about this before, you can only do so much with a miniseries. It's a TV show. You don't want to overload an audience with too many characters. And so you've got a company of over 100 paratroopers plus replacements. Guys are coming in and out. And so not everybody gets a mention. And one of the mainstays of the company, who was also a prolific writer in his own right, was Bob Rader, who is not even mentioned, to my knowledge, in the miniseries. But you've got some of his writing as well, that if you could share that would be terrific.
Yeah, Bob really wrote a lot of stuff. I should send you all of the information he wrote. He was a terrific writer, and he really captured the essence of all this stuff. And I just got this one little glimpse of this here, and it said, this is after the war kind of a thing, his thoughts after the war. And he says, I want to thank you all for allowing a miserable soul like me to have the privilege to serve with you. I think of Dick Winters stepping up and taking command of the company in Normandy. I know I am proud as hell of the men that I jumped with and was called upon to make the sacrifice in 4 campaigns from Normandy to Holland, along with the men in the heroic stand in the frostbite of Bastogne in December in 1944 through Germany and the rendezvous to Eagle's Nest, and to reflect about my home and family and friends. To all of those who have suffered from one malady to another since the shooting stopped in 1945, I hold them near and dear to me to this day. And, you know, that was just an example of what these guys felt about each other.
That sums it up beautifully. That's a very, very powerful statement. One thing I found that was neat about Rader as well was that wasn't he from the same hometown as Hubler and one of the other members of the company?
Well, I'm trying to think, was he from California? I think it was from California.
I'd have to go
I know
back.
he lived in California afterwards.
I'd have to go back and research. I had just seen somewhere in prepping for this, and I failed to write it down. So apologies to the audience. But Hubler and Rader definitely came from the same locale. I just thought that was another neat connection that doesn't make it into the series. So it's so many stories get left out, and the fact that you have all this correspondence and these relationships to keep those stories alive and to share with people through your talks and the travels and tours that you give, I think it's just amazing.
Yeah, you know, I am really blessed. You know, sometimes, you know, we had talked about this before, and I'm thinking, okay, so what can we talk about next? And geez, you know, I just opened the box and it's like, well, it's just full of stories in here. So, you know, there is a lot of material that we all can find within ourselves, within our family history and things like that. And I'm just blessed to be able to share these. And it's been a lot of fun. I can't thank you enough.
No, that's outstanding. And you had one other quotation, which I think came from, was it a pastor in your hometown who was?
Yeah, what had happened was, you know, I was looking around for this, and I asked my brother and my sister. Now, my brother doesn't throw anything away, right? So I said, "Hey, do you remember the letter from Pastor Joe? Joe Green. He was a pastor at one of the local churches. So he wrote this really cool little article about my dad, and it's called "What Are Real Heroes Made Of?" And you know, it just talks about, you know, my dad and the whole thing with you know, all these people that come to his funeral and how he was very non-assuming, and you know, the story about at the funeral, at the wake, you know, my dad had his medals and all that stuff, and you know, a lot of people don't know about medals, and I think so many folks who serve, you know, they don't. You know, they'll talk about the war to other people, but they're not going to run around and say, look at me, look at me. And, you know, my dad fit that mold as well. And so, and it wasn't something about, you know, I remember when the medals, I don't remember when he got the medals, because it was one of those things where, you know, you get in touch with your congressman or your senator.
Sure.
It's, you know, I did something, and they gave me a bunch of things. I could care less. I was just wanted to get home, kind of thing. And so I remember, not when they came in, but I remember the box, this little small box, and it came in, you know, and you're familiar with this. It came in stuff like this, you
Yes,
know,
sir.
these kind of things. So, and I remember that, but it wasn't something that he splashed around. And so it was an interesting article about my dad and most of the men and women of the day, and how they really, you know, didn't run around jumping around saying, "Hey, look at me, look at me," not like we do today. Well, I do today anyway. But so while I was looking through some stuff recently, there was an article about my dad in the local paper too, and I just this one little line in here, and it talks about my dad, and then the thoughts about the relationship he had with the men, and this kind of encapsulates the whole thing. He says, "The benefits I reaped from the war were the friends I have all over the country. The friendships that I made, you can't buy that. And that's about what it was.
That sums it up. It's plain speaking, but it means so much.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And one thing I'd like to end on is just it's a cliche, but it is it rings true, is the fact that the folks who say the most did the least. And your dad was a very quiet, humble man, and that speaks volumes about what he did as a trooper and what the men he served with did. So once again, George, always a pleasure to talk to you. Always a thrill to have you on the show. So thanks for coming out today.
hey, thanks so much for having me, Ben. It's been a treat.
Hey, no worries. So everybody, this is Ben Powers and George Luz saying thanks for joining us today on the Commander's Voice. We'll be back in a couple weeks and we'll be talking some more airborne history. George, you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Ben.